Greetings ladies and gentlemen. In this video, we are going to be talking about divine hiddenness by contemplating on some of the verses that have been given in the Quran regarding the hiddenness of God. In the previous video on trying to understand what God is through the Quran, we described God as that without which existence cannot exist, that which is uniquely indivisible and irreducible, the indestructible unaffectable source of dependence for everything, and to which nothing can be equaled or equated. In simpler terms, God is the operating force behind everything in existence. In today's video, we are going to be specifically focusing on the immanence of God, which is described in verse 3 of chapter 57. The verse reads as follows:
He is the Alpha and the Omega, and the evident and the immanent, and He is of all things, knowing.
We can see that in this verse, God is described as both the evident and the immanent, which means that God is perceptible, but yet imperceptible. In the last video, we covered these two terms to a certain degree, and therein we mentioned that we can perceive of God through the actions and movements that occur within the entire universe. We spoke about how everything that moves does so through the will of God. An example of how the evidence and immanence of God can be perceived is through an object in motion. For example, when I move my arm back and forth, I am only capable of doing so because there is a force that is influencing that motion. However, though the result is visibly apparent, in the fact that my hand can be seen and perceived as moving, the force behind that action is imperceivable. Now, this is a mundane illustration, but God's interaction with the universe is somewhat similar to this illustration, though to God belongs the highest analogy. This is what we refer to as divine hiddenness. Though we say that God is hidden, He is interactive with His creation through several of His attributes. Another verse that we can take a look at is verse 17 of chapter 8, which reads,
So thou did not kill them, O Muhammad, but God killed them, and thou did not throw when thou did throw, but it was God who threw, for it was in order that He may put the faithful through trial by way of a good trial, as assuredly God is indeed hearing, knowing.
In this verse, we are told that God was the one who was behind the actions of the Prophet during the Battle of Badr, as told in chapter 8. In the verse, the Prophet is informed that he had not killed the mushrikeen, but that it was God who had killed them, and that it was not he who threw when he did the throwing, but that it was God who did the throwing. So how does this relate to God's divine hiddenness? As we explained earlier, God is the force behind every action within the universe. Therefore, if we are to break this interaction down to the most basic level, then we do not and cannot partake in an interaction, except that God is essentially the one behind that action. We gave the example of someone who moves their hand back and forth, and how the force behind that action only happens thus, due to the manifestation of what we call God through the universe. In this aforementioned verse, when the Prophet threw with his hand during the battle, it was not he who was doing the actual throwing, rather it was the metaphysical force behind the throwing which enabled the Prophet to actually throw, though essentially, it was not he who threw, as he never could have thrown without there being a force behind the action. So when someone asks, how do we know that God exists? Then this is as simple of an answer as we can give to that question. We know that God exists because we can perceive of His existence through the motions in the universe. We know for a fact that there is a force behind that specific type of motion, and so we can safely conclude through our faculty of reason that God must exist. The fact alone that there is motion in the universe necessitates the existence of God, as God is that without which existence cannot exist, and He is the indestructible source of dependence for everything. Similarly, we can read in verse 19 of chapter 67 the following:
Have they not looked at the birds above them with wings spread out and contracting? Nothing holds them in place except the divine sovereign, as assuredly, He is indeed over all things, observing.
As we can see in this verse, we are instructed to take a look at the birds in the air, flying on their wings, spreading them out to glide upon the wind, and contracting them to pierce through the wind. Nothing other than God holds them up and keeps them in place. Once again, here we can see an object in motion, and the force that is acting upon that object and enabling it to do what it does, is the divine sovereign. In a similar manner, we are also told in verse 65 of chapter 22, which reads as follows.
Hast thou not seen that God has subdued for you whatever is in the earth, as well as the ships which sail upon the sea by his command, and that he restrains the sky lest it should fall upon the earth, except by his permission? Assuredly, God is indeed to the people compassionate, merciful.
In this verse, we are told that God is the one who restrains the sky from falling upon the earth, and that it can only fall upon the earth by the permission of God. When some people read verses such as this, they immediately accuse the Quran of promoting a view that supposes that the heaven is a solid object. However, this statement is merely a figure of speech, like saying that God is the one who makes the sun to set in the west and to rise in the east. We know that the sun does not literally move anywhere, but that it is stationary, yet when we speak of it, we say that it rises and that it sets. These are merely patterns of speech, which may not necessarily reflect reality, but we maintain them because we know what they mean and what they intend to convey. So returning to the verse at hand, we are informed that God restrains the sky from falling upon the earth, as from our view, the sky appears like a construction, implying that the heavenly bodies do not crash into the earth due to the fact that God is the one who restrains them and keeps them in place. Another way how we can comprehend of God's divine hiddenness would be by equating it to the concept of love. We all know what love is, but we may have different definitions of it. It is not something that is testable, seen, touched, or tasted, but we still believe in its existence. It can only be observed through its manifestations, which encompass a variety of types. For example, the love that is observed between a mother and a child is different from the love that is observed between a husband and a wife. This kind of love may be observed through the manifestation of a kiss between lovers, or a hug between friends, or even a handshake between acquaintances. Though this love can only be personified through gestures, its true nature or essence is unknown to us, and yet we still believe in its existence. We do not know of a definition that can encompass what love truly is, but we all do understand what it is when it is personified, especially when it is personified towards us. Typically, when people ask for a so-called evidence for God's existence, they do so without realizing that God is in fact quite evident in whatever they do, which again is why the Quran does not deal with the question of whether God exists or not. Typically, when people who deny the existence of God are asked about what would bring them to realization of God's existence, they respond that they do not know, that if God were indeed real, then he would know what would convince them. I am sorry to say, but this is a response that stems from stubbornness, and not from reasonableness, or even rationality. Some people claim that they would want something that is objectively testable, but again, this is a flaw in reasoning. If God is to do something that is miraculous, some of those who deny the existence of God would still deny regardless, as they themselves have attested to, since they would simply attribute the miraculous to some sort of illusion. If their minds cannot comprehend it, they will not attribute it to God, since there already exists a universe whose reason of existence they do not know, and the cause of which they do not know. So it would be inconceivable that if God were to do something miraculous, which they cannot explain, they would simply claim for it the same reason as they claim for the universe. They would claim that they do not know the cause of the unexplained occurrence, but that does not prove God's existence. It merely shows that they currently do not know the cause, but in the future they might figure out its cause. Thus, there is nothing that a miracle or miracles can do to ever convince someone who has set himself up for failure. They purposefully set forth a requirement which they know would not convince them, and which they know God would never do, even if he existed, so that they can justify their denial to themselves, and this is merely a form of stubbornness. Some, however, might say they would require something that is objectively testable, which they can repeat and reproduce, but again, this would then be no different from something that exists naturally. If God were to make something or do something which is reproducible in a laboratory, then it would be no different from any other thing which God has created in the universe that is testable. Once God does something that is visible within the natural world, then it operates according to the laws of creation, and it does not break the rules of the universe. Hence why people tended to reject the known miracles. Just because something is characterized as a miracle, it does not mean that it breaks the laws of the natural world. Take for example the famous virgin birth incident. It is said that Mary begot Jesus without a father, yet she was pregnant for the whole normal 9 months. The question is then, why would the conception be miraculous, when it cannot be verified, and the part which can be verified, meaning the pregnancy itself, be according to the natural laws? If God's intent was to perform a miracle to prove his power, why would he do a miracle which only he, Mary, and Jesus can know of, and none of the people for whom the miracle was done? If the miracle was intended as a proof for the people, then why would it be a hidden miracle? Wouldn't it have been a greater miracle if it was an immediate birth that did not require 9 months? That would be a miracle that is verifiable to everyone that was around at the time. In the Quran, in chapter 17, verse 90 to 96, the Prophet Muhammad is asked for a series of miracles, which include causing the earth to spring open with springs of water, causing a garden of date palms and grapevines to appear, wherein there are rivers flowing through, causing the sky to fall down in pieces as a form of punishment, bringing God and the angels face to face, causing a house made out of ornaments to appear, ascending into the heaven, and finally bringing a book down which they can read and see if what he claims is in fact the truth. 7 distinct miracles which the Prophet was inquired to perform to prove his prophethood, and that he truly had been appointed as a messenger by God. In the final miracle, they even state they would not believe in his ascension to the heaven, unless he could bring a book down with him which they can read and see if what he claims is in fact the truth. However, what is striking is the response that the Prophet gives to these requirements, as he responds by saying, "Glory be to my Lord. Am I not save a human being, a messenger?" This is a very, very important remark, and it is one that many people miss when it comes to the issue of miracles. Why would the Prophet mention his humanity in response to their ridiculous requirements? Why not simply say, "I am only a messenger of God. God is the one who decides which prophets receive miracles, and I have not been given any miracles"? Rather, his remark about his humanity points to the fact that what they were asking were not things that a human being can do, and that only someone who is superhuman can do such things. But returning to the point from earlier, miracles, which the Quran refers to as signs, are mere indicators that are bound to the natural laws which God has set, but may appear to break the laws, though in reality, do not. The descriptions of them might sound as if they break the natural order, but in fact they are well within the laws which God has created for the universe and how it should operate. Anyway, that's all I have for now on this topic. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the topic of discussion, and I will see you in the next video. Take care everyone.